Well, we have entered to office in 2010, I mean the current government in Hungary, and then we understood already that although we belong very clearly to NATO and the European Union, in order to ensure a safe growth path for the national economy, we have to stand with both feet on the ground, meaning that we do need to have an outreach to the Western and to the Eastern investors and companies as well. Therefore, back in 2010, we have introduced the political strategy called Eastern Opening, which was rather an economic political strategy, meaning that we started to discuss a lot with Eastern investors in order to attract them to Hungary, and we started to work a lot with the Hungarian companies to enable them to enter the Eastern markets. And as an outcome of that, China is the #1 investor this year already in Hungary. Not for the first time, 2020 was the first occasion, and China became our #1 trading partner outside of the European Union as well. So the political investment basically ended up in an enhanced economic cooperation and a big FDI inflow from China to Hungary, which we cherish a lot. This is one of the reasons why the national economy of ours could resist all the challenges and the crises we had to go through in the recent 3-4 years, and we could stay on the growth path.
So you're taking a fairly different approach, one may argue, to your European neighbours.
Absolutely.
Who are talking a lot about de-risking efforts right now. How do you manage to balance that relationship?
Look, we do believe that both decoupling and de-risking would be a suicide committed by the European economy. You know, there's a 865 billion euros of trade volume between China and the European Union on an annual basis. Now, how could you decouple without killing the European economy? Not to speak about the fact that we do not look at China as if it was a threat or a risk. And if you do not look at it as a country as a risk, then it doesn't make sense to speak about de-risking, right? So we look at China as a country with which, if you cooperate, you can take a lot of benefit out of it. So for us, China is an opportunity. Opportunity, but a must in the meantime as well. Because look at the backbone of the European economy, which is the automotive industry. A new industry is being born in front of our eyes, basically, with the revolution of the automotive industry, moving from the traditional powertrain to electric. And if you look at the European manufacturing companies, you see the automotive ones, you see that they can produce very good electric cars, but they cannot produce batteries. And if you don't have battery, you cannot start the engine of an electric car. So therefore, we do look at the cooperation between the Chinese and the Western European companies as a must in order to make the new European industry operational.
Let's talk about that. Obviously, we've had this major $7.6 billion investment by Contemporary Amperex, the Chinese battery giant, into your country, the biggest by that company overseas to service the European car market. Where are we up to in terms of that project, and can we expect to see more investments like that? Are there any in the pipeline that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you know, the fact is that these big Chinese investments come to Hungary because of the German car makers being present in Hungary. So while the German foreign minister speaks about decoupling, the CEOs of the German car makers usually call me to convince their Chinese suppliers to come to Hungary. So there's a big, let's say, gap between the political perception and the reality on the ground. So decoupling would kill the European economy and would be very harmful to the German economy as well. Look, we are the only country besides China and Germany where the three premium German car makers are present. And the presence of Mercedes has attracted CATL to come to Hungary. Now they have the major licenses, the ground preparation has already been started, and we are following the timeline which was required by the company. The presence of BMW attracted EV Energy, another Chinese battery manufacturer, to come. They basically build their factory next door to the BMW plant. And we have agreements with two other top 10 Chinese battery manufacturers already who are going to announce soon their investments. So this means that this year we will be able to double the FDI influx compared to last year, and last year was a record year with 6.5 billion euros of FDI committed to Hungary. Now this year we will reach 13 based on the Chinese battery manufacturers. Just recently, Huayo Cobalt has committed itself as well with a 1.3 billion euro investment to Hungary to produce the cathode for CATL. And you know, the more battery factories are coming, the more suppliers are arriving as well. Currently, we are number 4 in the world when it comes to capacity, thanks to the Chinese investors and the Koreans, because SK Innovation and Samsung SDI have been operating huge plants already in Hungary. So we are number 4 now. And when the investments of the 4 big Chinese, including CATL and EV Energy, are going to be completed, we will be number 2 in the world regarding the capacity of producing electric batteries. And if you put into consideration that we are number 95 globally when it comes to population, this is really remarkable.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense in terms of needing that material and that access to it, and that really helps supply chains. Let's switch gears to, of course, something that has been dominating headlines as this event, the World Economic Forum, got underway, and that is the developments out of Russia over the weekend. How are you watching that?
Look, we have been following these events very closely because we are in the close region of Russia. And whatever happens in Russia, especially when it comes to internal security situation, it does definitely have an impact on the security on the region, or can have a serious impact on the region. Therefore, we were following the events on the weekend, and I've been in touch with Foreign Minister Lavrov and Deputy Prime Minister Manturov, who have assured me at that time that they are managing the situation, and I've been in touch with the Belarus colleague of mine as well, Mr. Alejnik, who has already informed me about the deal between President Lukashenko and Mr. Prigozhin well before it went public. So we were aware of the developments, and you know, for us, peace is very important because we are in the neighborhood of the war. The war has really serious impacts on Hungary when it comes to the energy prices, inflation, food prices, not to speak about the Hungarians who are dying in the war representing the Hungarian community in Ukraine. So we are super interested in peace, and whatever brings closer to peace, we support it. Whatever brings closer to a threat of escalation, we do not support.
I want to pick up on that because, of course, you've recently said that Hungary cannot be compared to some of your neighbours when it comes to weaning themselves off that energy. I mean, how, you're talking about keeping a foot in both camps, are you managing to balance that relationship between Moscow and also European countries?
Look, when it comes to energy, we have never considered energy as if it was of political or ideological nature, because gas doesn't have an ideology, it has physics. So you need a physical infrastructure, you need source, and you need pipeline. And if you look at the energy infrastructure map of Central Europe, it is obvious for everybody that we cannot get rid of the Russian sources, because if we do so, we cannot supply the country. And then who will explain to the Hungarian people why gas access is being restricted? So therefore, we have a fair and, based on experience, satisfactory cooperation with Russia, reliable cooperation with Russia when it comes to the energy deliveries, be it oil, gas or nuclear fuel, and we just simply don't want to give it up. Of course, we are working on diversification, but for us, diversification does not mean that, you know, changing one source for the other or replacing one source with the other. But diversification for us is about the more possible sources and the more possible routes to be taken into consideration. So we are negotiating with the Qataris, with the Azeris and with other deliverers, but these deliveries cannot take over the Russian. They can be supplementary or additional deliveries, enhancing our energy security, obviously, but getting rid of the Russian sources, for us, it's impossible. And we keep on explaining it to our European colleagues, but unfortunately currently the political atmosphere in Europe is very ideological, is very emotional. It's very hard to cool down the tensions and to carry out a discussion based on common sense, let's put it this way.